This Saturday, UFC Oklahoma City gives us a main event that nobody expected just a few months ago. Former middleweight champion Dricus Du Plessis is back. Standing across from him will be one of the greatest welterweights in UFC history, Kamaru Usman. At first glance, this might look like a simple comeback fight for Du Plessis after losing his title. But don't let that fool you. For Usman, this could be one last chance to prove he still belongs among the elite. For Du Plessis, it's an opportunity to remind the world that losing the belt didn't change who he is. And here's what makes this fight even more interesting. Some of the biggest names in MMA completely disagree on who wins. Chael Sonnen is backing Usman. Israel Adesanya is also leaning toward Usman. Paulo Costa thinks Du Plessis gets the job done. So today, we're breaking down both fighters, looking at their biggest strengths, what the experts are saying, and at the end, I'll give you my prediction. Let's break it down.
Welcome to MMA TV, built for true MMA fans.
What's up, everyone? This is Zach from MMA TV, your home for UFC news, fight breakdowns, and everything happening in the world of MMA. If you enjoy honest fight analysis without the hype, make sure to subscribe because we're covering every major UFC event. Now let's get into it. Before we talk about Kamaru Usman, let's start with the former champion. Because Dricus Du Plessis might be one of the hardest fighters in the UFC to analyze. If you've watched him fight before, you know exactly what I mean. Nothing about his striking looks textbook. His punches come from strange angles. His footwork can look awkward. Sometimes it even feels like he's completely out of position. Yet somehow, it keeps working. That's what makes Du Plessis so dangerous. He's unpredictable. His opponents spend entire training camps preparing for him, and once the cage door closes, they still struggle to figure him out. The numbers help explain why. Throughout his UFC career, Du Plessis has attempted more than 1,500 significant strikes while landing nearly half of them, maintaining an accuracy of around 49%. Even more impressive, he averages more than 5 significant strikes landed per minute, showing that despite his unconventional style, he's constantly creating offense. But statistics only tell part of the story. What really separates Du Plessis is the power behind those shots. He owns 9 knockout victories in his professional career, including several in the UFC. One of the best examples came against former champion Robert Whittaker. A single jab changed the entire fight. Moments like that remind you that Du Plessis doesn't need perfect technique to hurt elite opponents. He just needs one clean opening. Of course, power isn't his only weapon. One thing people sometimes overlook is his cardio. For a fighter who throws with so much force, he rarely slows down. We've seen him push a relentless pace deep into championship fights, and that's one of the biggest reasons he's so difficult to deal with. Even when his opponents survive the early exchanges, they still have to deal with that pressure for 5 full rounds. And that's exhausting. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. What about his grappling? That's a fair question. A lot of fans still remember how Khamzat Chimaev controlled Du Plessis on the ground. There were moments where it looked like Dricus simply couldn't get back to his feet. But I also think it's important to add some context here. Looking bad against Khamzat doesn't automatically mean your wrestling is bad. Khamzat has made elite wrestlers and elite grapplers look ordinary throughout his career. That's part of what makes him so special. So I don't think it's fair to judge Du Plessis' entire grappling game based on one opponent who's widely considered one of the best wrestlers in MMA today. So if we sum up Du Plessis' biggest strengths, you've got explosive knockout power, an unpredictable striking style that's incredibly difficult to prepare for, solid finishing instincts whenever opportunities appear, and perhaps his greatest weapon of all, his gas tank. Because if this turns into a long fight, Du Plessis has already shown he can maintain a high pace for 25 minutes. But here's the real question. Will any of that be enough against one of the greatest wrestlers the UFC has ever seen? That's where Kamaru Usman changes everything. And trust me, this matchup is much closer than some fans think. If Dricus Du Plessis is one of the most unpredictable strikers in the UFC, then Kamaru Usman is almost the complete opposite. Everything Usman does feels calculated, disciplined, efficient. For years, he built his legacy by controlling fights instead of chasing chaos. And that's exactly why so many people still believe he can win this matchup. When people think about Usman, the first thing that comes to mind is usually his wrestling. And that's fair. He's one of the most accomplished wrestlers ever to compete in the UFC. But if you followed his career closely, you know that's only part of the story. During his championship reign, Usman completely transformed his striking. Working alongside Trevor Wittman, he developed one of the best jabs in the division, improved his footwork, and became much more comfortable fighting at range. Just ask Jorge Masvidal. One perfectly timed right hand produced one of the most iconic knockouts in UFC history. That moment proved something important. Usman wasn't just a wrestler anymore. He had become a complete mixed martial artist. Statistically, his resume speaks for itself. Usman has landed more than 1,000 significant strikes inside the octagon while maintaining impressive striking efficiency. Add that to his elite wrestling credentials and years of championship experience, and it's easy to understand why many analysts still believe he has everything needed to compete with the best in the world. But there's another side to this story: Father Time. For the first time in his career, people aren't asking whether Usman is skilled enough. They're asking whether he's still the same fighter. He's now 39 years old. He's absorbed a lot of damage over the years. He's been through countless 5-round title fights. And while experience is invaluable, age is undefeated. That's one of the biggest questions heading into Saturday night. How much of the old Kamaru Usman is still there? Can he still wrestle for 25 minutes? Can he still deal with someone who never stops moving forward? Or has time finally caught up with one of the greatest welterweights we've ever seen? Those are difficult questions, and apparently even some of the biggest names in MMA can't agree on the answers. Former UFC title challenger Chael Sonnen believes this is a very favorable matchup for Usman. According to Sonnen, wrestling changes everything. His argument is simple: Du Plessis has looked vulnerable against high-level grapplers before, and if Usman can consistently mix his takedowns with his striking, he believes the former welterweight champion has a legitimate path to victory. Interestingly, Israel Adesanya seems to see it in a similar way. Even after sharing one of the most intense rivalries in recent middleweight history with Du Plessis, Adesanya admitted he believes Usman has a real chance to win this fight. That's significant, because Adesanya knows exactly what it's like to stand across from Dricus. He understands how awkward that style can be, yet he still thinks Usman's experience, fight IQ, and wrestling could be enough to neutralize many of Du Plessis' biggest weapons. On the other hand, not everyone is buying that prediction. Paulo Costa sees things very differently. Costa believes Du Plessis' physicality, pressure, and relentless pace will simply be too much for Usman at this stage of his career. And honestly, it's hard to dismiss that argument. We've already talked about Dricus' cardio, his power, his constant forward pressure. If Usman can't slow the fight down, he could find himself dealing with one of the highest-paced opponents he's faced in years. So here's the big question: what matters more in this matchup? Elite wrestling and championship experience, or youth, pressure, and physicality? Because that's really what this fight comes down to. And after looking at both sides, I think I'm finally ready to make my prediction. But before I do, there's one detail that I believe could decide the entire fight. Let's talk about it. So, after breaking down both fighters, looking at the numbers, listening to what Chael Sonnen, Israel Adesanya, and Paulo Costa had to say, what do I think happens this Saturday? Honestly, I think this fight will come down to one thing: not power, not striking, not even wrestling. It's the pace. Because if there's one thing we've learned about Dricus Du Plessis over the last few years, it's that he refuses to let his opponents fight comfortably. He's constantly moving forward, constantly throwing, constantly forcing exchanges. Whether his technique looks beautiful or not, he's always making you react. And that's exhausting. The big question is whether Kamaru Usman can slow that pace down. If he can establish his jab, control the distance, mix in his wrestling, and force Du Plessis to fight at his rhythm, I genuinely believe Usman has a path to victory. That's why so many analysts are giving him a real chance. You simply can't overlook someone with his championship experience. But there's another side to this. Usman hasn't fought consistently over the last few years. He's now competing at middleweight against one of the strongest and most physically imposing fighters in the division. That's a massive challenge. Even if his wrestling works early, can he maintain that pace over 5 rounds? Can he continue shooting takedowns while carrying extra weight against someone who never seems to slow down? Those are the questions that make this fight so fascinating, because we honestly don't know the answers until the cage door closes. And that's exactly why I love this matchup. There are so many unknowns. It's not just striker versus wrestler. It's not just youth versus experience. It's a former middleweight champion trying to prove that losing the belt didn't define him, against one of the greatest welterweights of all time, who's trying to prove that he still belongs among the elite. Sometimes, those are the fights that surprise us the most. Now, if you're asking for my prediction, I'm leaning toward Dricus Du Plessis, not because I think Kamaru Usman is washed. Far from it. I still believe Usman has the skills to compete with anyone, but I think age, activity, and physicality are simply too much to ignore. Du Plessis is younger. He's naturally bigger. He's been competing against middleweights consistently. I think we'll see moments where Usman's wrestling creates real problems, I think he'll have success controlling parts of the fight, but over 25 minutes, I believe Du Plessis' pressure, durability, and relentless pace will gradually begin to take over. Whether that's enough for a finish or a decision, we'll have to wait and see. But if I had to make my pick today, I'm taking Dricus Du Plessis. Of course, this is MMA. One punch, one takedown, one mistake. That's all it takes to completely change a fight, and that's exactly why we keep watching. Now I want to hear from you. Who are you picking this weekend? Dricus Du Plessis or Kamaru Usman? And more importantly, how do you think they get it done? Let me know down in the comments because I'm really curious to see where everyone stands before fight night. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to leave a like. Subscribe to MMA TV for more UFC news, fight breakdowns, predictions, and analysis every single week. We've got plenty more coverage coming for UFC Oklahoma City, so make sure you don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your support. I'll see you in the next one.